Sometimes the person who saves your life is the one you never meant to call. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above the pediatric emergency waiting room, casting pale shadows across the rows of plastic chairs. Emily Carter stared at the screen of her phone through tired eyes that burned from too many sleepless nights. Across from her, little Lily lay curled beneath a thin hospital blanket, her small body finally resting after hours of discomfort and fever. The digital clock on the wall read 11:42 p.m. outside. A cold spring rain tapped gently against the windows, turning the city lights into blurry streaks of gold and white. Emily rubbed her temples and checked her bank account for the fifth time in 10 minutes. $43.17. That was all she had left until Friday. She swallowed hard. The doctor had been kind, but kindness didn't pay bills. The pharmacy downstairs had already told her how much Lily's prescription would cost. The number still echoed inside her head like a warning bell she couldn't silence. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. Not because she forgot, because Lily needed dinner more than she did. Her daughter shifted slightly in her sleep, clutching the stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere. The rabbit's ears were worn from years of love. Emily smiled despite herself. Lily always called it Mr. Hops. Somehow the sight of that little toy made everything hurt more. She unlocked her phone again. Her older sister, Megan, lived only 20 minutes away. Emily hated asking for help. She hated feeling like a burden. But tonight was different. Tonight she was exhausted, frightened, alone. Her fingers trembled as she opened a text message and typed, "Can you come to Mercy Children's? I'm in the ER waiting room. Lily's fever got worse. I don't know what to do anymore." She hesitated. Then she tapped the location icon and attached her GPS pin. For a moment, she stared at the message. Her eyes felt heavy. She barely noticed that the conversation wasn't Megan's. Earlier that afternoon, she had entered a number from a job application inquiry and never deleted it. The names looked similar. The exhaustion blurred everything together. She pressed send. The message disappeared. Delivered. Emily exhaled slowly and leaned back in the chair. The relief lasted less than a second. Her phone battery flashed red. 1% remaining. She reached for her charger, then remembered it was still sitting on her kitchen counter beside an unpaid electric bill. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Of course it was. The universe seemed determined to test her patience one inconvenience at a time. Across the room, a television mounted near the ceiling played a late-night weather report with the volume muted. A young father paced beside a vending machine. An elderly woman slept with a magazine across her lap. Everyone seemed to be carrying a burden invisible to the rest of the world. Emily looked at Lily again. She remembered the first time she held her daughter. The tiny fingers, the sleepy blue eyes, the promise she had whispered into the newborn's ear. "I'll always protect you." Tonight that promise felt heavier than ever. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She reached down and gently brushed a strand of blonde hair from Lily's forehead. "I'm trying, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm trying so hard." Her phone vibrated. Emily glanced down. A response had arrived almost immediately. She frowned. The number wasn't Megan's. The message contained only 4 words. Who was this exactly? Confusion flickered across her face. She blinked twice and looked closer. Then her heart dropped. Wrong conversation. Wrong number. Wrong person. "Oh no," she whispered. The battery indicator flashed again. 1%. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. "I'm sorry. Wrong number." She hit send. Before she could type anything else, the screen went black. The phone died in her hand. Emily stared at her reflection in the dark glass. For several seconds, she simply sat there in silence while the rain continued tapping against the windows. Then she slipped the lifeless phone into her purse and lowered her head. She didn't know that 30 miles away, inside a glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Chicago, a billionaire CEO had just read her message. And for the first time in years, he had abruptly stopped listening to the meeting happening around him. The city lights shimmered against the rain-streaked windows of Hayes Technologies headquarters as the quarterly strategy meeting continued around the long walnut conference table. Charts glowed on a massive screen. Executives discussed projections worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Voices rose and fell with carefully measured confidence. Yet Alexander Hayes heard almost none of it. His attention remained fixed on the message glowing on the screen of his phone. For simple sentences. A location pin. and one line that refused to leave his mind. I do not know what to do anymore. Alexander sat motionless in his chair. At 39 years old, he had spent more than a decade building one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the country. People described him as disciplined, rational, impossible to distract. His board admired his ability to make decisions without emotion. It was a reputation he had worked hard to earn. Yet somehow a message from a stranger had slipped through every wall he had built around himself. Alexander, one of the executives asked, "Do you agree with the proposal?" He looked up briefly. What? Several people exchanged surprised glances. It was unlike him to lose focus. The acquisition timeline, the executive repeated. Alexander blinked and glanced toward the presentation screen. Numbers, forecasts, risk assessments. Normally, he would have dissected every detail within seconds. Tonight, he could barely remember what they were discussing. His eyes drifted back to the phone. The sender had apologized. Wrong number. End of conversation. It should have been simple. Yet something felt unfinished. He opened the location again. Mercy Children's Hospital. His jaw tightened. The name hit harder than he expected. Memories surfaced without warning. White hospital walls. Endless waiting rooms. The smell of disinfectant. The soft beeping of machines. His younger sister Sophia, sitting in a hospital bed with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. He had been 17. She had been 12. The memory still lived somewhere deep inside him, untouched and carefully hidden. Away. For years he had trained himself not to revisit those days. But tonight, one wrong text message had cracked open a door he thought was permanently sealed. Alexander set his phone face down on the table. Continue without me. The room fell silent. Excuse me, the chief financial officer asked. Continue the meeting, Alexander repeated calmly. I will review the recommendations tomorrow. Confusion spread around the table. Nobody could remember the last time he had walked out of an executive meeting. Alexander stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and headed toward the door before anyone could question him further. The rain felt colder outside. His driver stepped forward immediately. Home, sir. Alexander looked toward the dark skyline. No, he gave the hospital address. The driver nodded and opened the rear door. As the car pulled away from the building, Alexander stared through the rain-speckled glass. Chicago moved around him in rivers of headlights and reflections. Restaurants glowed warmly behind fogged windows. Pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas. Life continued as usual. Yet he could not shake the feeling that somewhere across the city, a complete stranger was carrying a burden alone. 20 minutes into the drive, they stopped at a red light beside a small flower shop preparing to close for the night. Alexander noticed the owner carrying buckets of roses inside from the sidewalk display. Without thinking, he tapped the divider. Pull over. The driver looked surprised but obeyed. Alexander stepped out into the rain and crossed the street. A bell chimed softly as he entered the shop. The elderly woman behind the counter smiled politely. We are almost closed. Alexander nodded. His eyes wandered across the flowers. Red roses, pink roses, yellow roses. Then he noticed a bouquet of white roses resting alone in a crystal vase. For a moment, he remembered Sophia. White roses had always been her favorite. Every birthday, every school recital, every hospital visit. White roses. I will take those, he said quietly. The florist wrapped the bouquet carefully. Special occasion? She asked. Alexander hesitated. He realized he did not have an answer. He did not know the woman from the text message. He did not know her story. He did not know why he was driving across the city with flowers in the middle of the night. I am not sure, he admitted. The florist smiled gently. Sometimes that is when flowers matter most. A few minutes later, the car merged back into traffic. Alexander looked down at the bouquet resting beside him. The white petals seemed almost luminous beneath the soft interior lights. Ahead, Mercy Children's Hospital appeared through the rain, rising above the city blocks like a beacon against the darkness. And for reasons he could not fully explain, his pulse quickened as though he were approaching something far more important than a hospital. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss as Alexander stepped into the hospital lobby. Warm air replaced the cold rain that clung to his coat. The scent of coffee and disinfectant drifted through the quiet building. It was nearly midnight now. The waiting area had thinned, leaving only a handful of people scattered across the rows of chairs. Some stared at their phones. Others sat in silence, carrying worries too heavy for words. Alexander adjusted his grip on the bouquet and glanced around. For a moment, he felt ridiculous. He was one of the most recognizable business leaders in Chicago. He should have been reviewing contracts or preparing for tomorrow's investor calls. Instead, he was standing inside a children's hospital searching for a stranger who had accidentally texted him. Yet the feeling that brought him here refused to leave. He approached the reception desk. A tired volunteer looked up and offered a polite smile. "Can I help you?" Alexander hesitated. "I'm looking for someone. A woman named Emily Carter." The volunteer typed briefly into a computer. "There is an Emily Carter in the pediatric emergency waiting area." She pointed down a hallway illuminated by soft overhead lights. "Thank you." His footsteps echoed quietly against the polished floor as he followed the corridor. The bouquet felt strangely heavy in his hand, not because of the flowers themselves, because he still could not explain why he was carrying them. Then he saw her. Emily sat alone near the far corner of the waiting room. Her head rested against the wall behind her. One arm remained draped protectively across a small sleeping child beside her. Even from several feet away, exhaustion was written across every detail of her posture. Her hair had slipped loose from its ponytail. Dark circles framed her eyes. The paper hospital wristband around her daughter's tiny wrist caught the light. Alexander stopped walking. Something about the scene struck him harder than he expected. There was no drama, no crisis unfolding before his eyes. Just a mother who looked completely worn out. The kind of exhaustion money could not fix. The kind that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. He noticed a folder sitting beside her chair. Medical paperwork protruded from the top. Beneath it rested a pharmacy estimate. The total printed at the bottom was visible even from where he stood. Emily had likely seen that number dozens of times tonight. Alexander remembered the countless financial reports he reviewed every year. Millions gained, millions lost. Entire columns of numbers. Yet somehow that single number printed on a hospital form felt more significant than all of them combined. His attention shifted to the child. Lily. He knew her name from the text. The little girl slept with a stuffed rabbit pressed tightly against her chest. One small hand remained wrapped around one of its ears, as if letting go might somehow make everything worse. Alexander felt an unexpected ache in his chest. Sophia used to sleep the same way. Different toy. Same determination. Same trust. He swallowed hard and looked away. For years he had succeeded by staying focused on facts. Logic. Results. Emotions complicated decisions. Tonight emotions seemed impossible to ignore. Emily stirred slightly in her chair. Her eyes opened halfway before quickly closing again. She was fighting sleep, losing the battle one moment at a time. Alexander glanced down at the bouquet, then carefully crossed the remaining distance. He placed the white roses on the empty chair beside her without making a sound. For a second, he considered leaving. Perhaps that would be easier. A simple act of kindness. Nothing more. But just as he turned away, a small voice broke the silence. "Mommy." Lily's eyes fluttered open. The little girl looked around sleepily before noticing the flowers. Her gaze widened. "Mommy," she whispered again, tugging gently at Emily's sleeve. Emily blinked awake and looked toward her daughter. Then she saw the bouquet. Confusion crossed her face. Slowly she lifted her eyes and found herself staring directly at the tall stranger standing beside their chairs. Neither of them spoke. For a brief moment, the noise of the hospital seemed to disappear entirely. And somewhere deep inside, both of them sensed that this unexpected meeting was about to change far more than either one could imagine. Emily stared at the stranger for several seconds, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The bouquet of white roses looked completely out of place in the pediatric emergency waiting room. So did the man standing beside them. His charcoal coat was still damp from the rain. His posture was calm, composed, almost unfamiliar in a place filled with anxiety and exhaustion. Lily sat up slightly and pointed at the flowers. "Mommy, are those for us?" Emily blinked. "I do not know, sweetheart." Then she looked back at the stranger. "I think there must be some mistake." Alexander offered a small smile. Actually, there was. Emily frowned. Something about his voice sounded reassuring, but her guard immediately rose. Years of handling problems alone had taught her not to trust unexpected kindness too quickly. "Do I know you?" she asked. "No," he hesitated. "At least, I do not think so." Lily looked from one adult to the other with open curiosity. "Then why did you bring flowers?" she asked. Alexander glanced at the little girl and found himself smiling more naturally. Because hospitals can feel scary. Lily considered this seriously. That is true. Emily almost laughed despite herself. It was the first time all evening she had seen Lily show any interest in something besides how tired she felt. I am Emily, she said cautiously. And this is Lily. Alexander. He extended a hand. Emily shook it briefly. His grip was firm but respectful. Nothing about him felt threatening. Yet the entire situation remained confusing. How exactly did you find us? She asked. Alexander reached into his coat pocket and showed her his phone. Emily's eyes widened as realization slowly dawned. The text message. The wrong number, Alexander said. The wrong number, Emily repeated, immediately covering her face with one hand. Oh my goodness. Lily giggled. Mommy sends messages to the wrong people sometimes. Thank you, Lily, Emily muttered. That information was not necessary. The little girl smiled proudly anyway. For the first time that night, the tension around them softened. Alexander sat down in the empty chair nearby, leaving a respectful distance. I was in a meeting when I received it. Emily shook her head in disbelief. You drove all the way here because of a wrong text. Apparently. That is not normal. Probably not. She studied him more carefully. Everything about him suggested success. The watch, the tailored clothing, the confidence. Yet there was no arrogance in the way he spoke. No expectation of gratitude. That alone felt unusual. Emily glanced down at the flowers. You really did not have to do this. I know. Most people would have ignored the message. Most people probably would. His honesty caught her off guard. For a moment, neither spoke. Around them, nurses moved quietly through the hallways. Somewhere down the corridor, a machine beeped steadily. Rain continued tapping against the windows. Then Lily suddenly tugged on Emily's sleeve. Mommy, what is it, sweetheart? Can we keep the flowers? Emily looked at Alexander. He nodded. They are yours. Lily's face brightened instantly. She carefully touched one of the petals. They are pretty. Alexander felt an unexpected warmth settle in his chest. The reaction was so simple, so genuine. No business deal, no strategy, no negotiation. Just a child happy to receive flowers. Emily noticed the expression on his face. For the first time, she wondered if there was a reason he had come beyond simple curiosity. People did not usually drive across Chicago at midnight because of a mistaken text message. There was a story behind that decision. She could feel it. Before she could ask another question, a nurse appeared in the doorway holding a clipboard. Emily Carter? Emily stood immediately. Yes. The doctor would like to speak with you about Lily's test results. The knot in her stomach returned instantly. She had almost forgotten why they were there. The flowers, the conversation, the strange coincidence. All of it faded beneath the weight of those words. Emily looked toward Lily, then toward the folder containing the unpaid estimates sitting beside her chair. Anxiety washed over her again. Alexander noticed the change in her expression. He noticed the way her shoulders tightened, the way she instinctively reached for her daughter's hand. And for the first time since arriving, he realized that whatever happened next might matter far more than the wrong message that had brought him there. Emily followed the nurse down the hallway, while Lily held tightly to her hand. The little girl carried the bouquet of white roses carefully against her chest, as though it were something precious. Alexander remained seated for only a moment before standing and watching them disappear through the doorway. He told himself he should leave. He had already done far more than any reasonable stranger would do. Yet his feet refused to move. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The waiting room grew quieter as midnight approached. Alexander walked toward a nearby coffee station and poured himself a cup he barely touched. His thoughts kept returning to the look on Emily's face when the nurse mentioned the test results. He recognized that expression. He had seen it years ago in hospital corridors while waiting beside his parents. It was the expression of someone preparing for news they could not control. Across the hall, the doctor's office door finally opened. Emily stepped out carrying a folder. Alexander immediately noticed the difference. Her shoulders seemed heavier. The exhaustion remained, but now worry sat beside it. Lily walked quietly at her side. The child no longer looked sleepy. She looked confused in the way children often did when adults tried to protect them from problems they did not fully understand. Emily thanked the doctor softly before turning toward the waiting area. When she saw Alexander still there, genuine surprise crossed her face. You are still here? She asked. Apparently, he replied with a small smile. For a moment, she looked as though she wanted to say something, but could not find the words. Instead, she lowered her eyes toward the folder in her hands. Alexander noticed her grip tighten around the papers. Is Lily okay? Emily nodded quickly. She is going to be okay. Then she hesitated. The doctor thinks the medication should help. They want to monitor her closely over the next few weeks. Relief softened Alexander's expression. That sounds like good news. It is. Emily forced a smile. Mostly. The single word carried more weight than the rest of the sentence. Alexander glanced toward the folder. What is the other part? Emily laughed quietly, though there was no humor in it. The part where being sick is expensive. She immediately regretted saying it. Embarrassment flushed her cheeks. She was not looking for sympathy. She certainly was not looking for help from a stranger. But exhaustion had weakened the filter she usually kept in place. Alexander did not respond right away. Instead, he looked toward Lily. The little girl sat in a nearby chair, arranging the roses one by one, while speaking softly to her stuffed rabbit, completely unaware of the financial calculations consuming her mother's thoughts. Children have a way of reminding us what matters, he said. Emily followed his gaze. She is the reason I keep going. The answer came instantly. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Alexander believed her. You are a good mother. Emily blinked. The compliment landed harder than she expected. People often praise strong women after they survive difficult situations. Few people notice them while they were still living through those situations. You do not know me, she said quietly. I know you spent the entire evening worrying about your daughter instead of yourself. He nodded toward the untouched vending machine snacks sitting nearby. I also know you have not eaten anything. Emily stared at him. How did you know that? Because the coffee machine is the first place exhausted adults visit in hospitals. A faint smile appeared. And you never went near it. To her own surprise, Emily laughed. It was brief, but genuine. The sound seemed to brighten the space between them. Then her stomach betrayed her with a soft growl. She immediately looked away in embarrassment. Alexander pretended not to notice. There is a 24-hour diner 2 blocks from here, he said casually. They make terrible coffee, but surprisingly good soup. Emily opened her mouth to decline. Habit. Pride. Survival instinct. Yet before she could speak, Lily looked up excitedly. Mommy, soup sounds amazing. Emily closed her eyes for a second. Somewhere above them, rain continued tapping against the hospital windows. And for the first time that night, the future felt just a little less lonely than it had a few hours earlier. The diner sat beneath a flickering neon sign that reflected across the wet pavement like liquid gold. Inside, the scent of fresh coffee and homemade soup wrapped around the small room with comforting warmth. A waitress with silver hair led them to a corner booth near the window. Lily immediately climbed onto the seat beside Emily, carefully placing the bouquet of white roses between them as if they were part of the family now. Alexander sat across from them. The late-night crowd was small. A truck driver ate quietly near the counter. 2 nurses in blue scrubs shared a slice of pie after what looked like a very long shift. The ordinary scene felt strangely peaceful after the tension of the hospital. Order whatever you want, Alexander said as he opened a menu. Emily shook her head immediately. We are fine. Mommy, Lily whispered. You said we only had crackers at home. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Children had a remarkable ability to reveal truths adults tried to hide. Alexander pretended not to notice her embarrassment. Then the soup is definitely happening. A few minutes later, bowls of chicken noodle soup arrived along with grilled cheese sandwiches. Steam curled into the air. Lily's eyes widened as though someone had placed a treasure chest in front of her. This looks amazing. Emily watched her daughter take the first bite. The little girl's shoulders relaxed almost instantly. Relief softened Emily's expression. Sometimes happiness was not complicated. Sometimes it was simply seeing your child eat after a difficult day. Alexander noticed every detail. The way Emily quietly pushed half of her sandwich toward Lily. The way she checked her daughter's forehead every few minutes without realizing she was doing it. The way exhaustion lingered behind her smile. How old is she? He asked. 6. Emily looked at Lily. She thinks she is 16. I do not, Lily protested. Maybe 12. Alexander laughed. 12 already? That is impressive. Lily grinned proudly. For the first time all evening, the little girl looked completely like a child instead of a patient. The conversation drifted naturally after that. Emily spoke about working part-time at a bookstore while taking online accounting classes at night. She described juggling schedules, childcare, rent payments, and homework assignments. Not dramatically, simply as facts. Alexander listened carefully. What struck him was not how difficult her life sounded. It was how rarely she complained about it. Every challenge somehow returned to Lily. Every sacrifice felt automatic. What about Lily's father? The question slipped out before he could stop it. Emily's smile faded slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal an old wound. He left when she was a baby. Alexander immediately regretted asking. I am sorry. Emily shrugged gently. It happened a long time ago. Yet something in her eyes suggested that some disappointments never completely belonged to the past. Lily remained focused on her soup, seemingly unaware of the shift in conversation. Alexander changed the subject. And the accounting classes? Emily smiled again. Almost finished. That is impressive. Mostly exhausting. Same thing sometimes. She laughed softly. Then her gaze drifted toward the hospital paperwork sticking out of her purse. The smile disappeared. Alexander noticed. The medication? Emily nodded. The insurance covers part of it. She paused. Not enough. There it was again. The burden she carried every minute of every day. Numbers. Bills. Calculations. Decisions no parent should have to make. Alexander looked out the window at the rain sliding down the glass. Then back at Emily. An idea had already begun forming in his mind, though he had not yet decided what to do with it. Before he could speak, a middle-aged man entered the diner carrying an umbrella. He stopped abruptly near the entrance. His eyes widened. Then he stared directly at Alexander. Recognition flashed across his face. Wait a second, the man said loudly. You are Alexander Hayes. The room fell silent. Emily blinked. The waitress looked up from the counter. Even Lily paused with her spoon halfway to her mouth. Alexander closed his eyes for half a second. He had almost forgotten that outside boardrooms and office buildings, people sometimes recognized him. Slowly, he looked back at Emily. The confusion on her face was already turning into something else. Something closer to shock. Emily stared at Alexander as the words settled over the table. Alexander Hayes. The name felt familiar immediately. Not because she followed business news, but because his company appeared everywhere. Commercials, articles, billboards. Even the bookstore where she worked sold magazines with his face on the cover. Suddenly, the expensive coat, the quiet confidence, and the way people seemed to notice him made perfect sense. You are that Alexander Hayes? She asked softly. Across the diner, the man who had recognized him was already apologizing for interrupting before returning to his seat. The brief moment of attention faded, but the atmosphere at the booth had completely changed. Alexander nodded once. Yes. Emily leaned back against the booth. For a second, she felt embarrassed remembering every casual thing she had said during the evening. The soup, the wrong text, the hospital. None of it seemed real anymore. You own Hayes Technologies? I do. Lily looked between them. Are you famous? Alexander smiled. Not the fun kind. Can you do magic? She asked. Emily immediately covered her face. Lily. What? Lily said innocently. Rich people always do interesting things in movies. To Emily's surprise, Alexander laughed. It was not the polite laugh of a businessman. It was genuine. Unfortunately, no magic. That is disappointing, Lily said seriously. The comment broke some of the tension. Emily found herself smiling despite everything. Yet questions continued racing through her mind. Why did you not tell me? She asked. Alexander looked down at his coffee. Because it did not seem important. Emily almost laughed at the absurdity of that statement. Being a billionaire is not important. Not tonight. His answer came without hesitation. Something about the sincerity in his voice silenced her. He was not trying to impress her. If anything, he seemed uncomfortable discussing himself at all. The waitress arrived with the check. Before Emily could reach for it, Alexander quietly took it. Absolutely not, Emily said immediately. Emily. No, she shook her head. You already bought dinner. It is a bowl of soup. That is not the point. Alexander studied her for a moment. Then he understood. Pride was not the right word. It was dignity. The same dignity that had carried her through every difficult day. The same dignity that made her refuse help even when she desperately needed it. He respected that. Then consider it repayment. For what? For accidentally texting me. Lily giggled. Emily tried not to smile. The argument was impossible to win. Eventually, she surrendered with a reluctant shake of her head. Outside, the rain had finally begun to slow. The city looked softer through the diner windows. Less harsh, less lonely. As they prepared to leave, Emily reached for the hospital folder sticking from her purse. A single sheet slipped free and landed near Alexander's side of the booth. He picked it up automatically. His eyes moved across the page before he could stop himself. It was a billing estimate from the hospital pharmacy. The number at the bottom made his expression tighten almost imperceptibly. Emily immediately took the paper back. Sorry. She slipped it into the folder. I did not mean for you to see that. Alexander said nothing, but the figure remained fixed in his mind. He had spent more money on a single business dinner than the amount printed on that page. Yet for Emily it represented weeks of worry, months of planning, sacrifices he could not even imagine. They stepped outside together. The cool night air carried the scent of rain and fresh pavement. Lily held the roses with one hand and Emily's fingers with the other. Across the street, Alexander's black sedan waited beneath a street lamp. Emily noticed the driver standing beside it. Another reminder that this man lived in a completely different world. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. Alexander looked at Lily, then at Emily. I am glad you sent the message. Even though it was the wrong number. Especially because it was the wrong number. For a moment neither moved. Traffic rolled past in the distance. Somewhere above them, clouds began breaking apart, revealing small pieces of the night sky. Then Alexander's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. A message from his assistant. Along with tomorrow's schedule was an attached document. One detail immediately caught his attention. Mercy Children's Hospital Foundation. His company had donated millions to the organization over the years. A thought formed instantly, quietly, deliberately. The kind of thought that changed lives long before anyone realized it. When he looked up again, Emily was helping Lily into a taxi headed home. Neither mother nor daughter had any idea that before sunrise, Alexander Hayes intended to make a phone call that would alter the course of their future. The first rays of morning sunlight spilled across the Chicago skyline as Alexander stood alone in his office overlooking the city. The events of the previous night should have faded into memory by now. Instead, they occupied every corner of his thoughts. His assistant entered carrying a tablet and a stack of reports. You are here early, she said. Alexander looked up from the window. I need information about a patient assistance program at Mercy Children's Hospital. She blinked in surprise. Patient assistance? How quickly can emergency medication grants be approved? His assistant opened the tablet immediately. Usually several days. Sometimes longer depending on funding. Alexander nodded slowly. What if funding was not the problem? She had worked for him long enough to recognize that tone. It meant a decision had already been made. 40 minutes later, a conference call connected him with the executive director of the hospital foundation. The conversation was brief. Alexander did not mention Emily's name. He did not explain the wrong text message. He simply expanded an existing charitable fund and requested that several pending pediatric assistance cases be reviewed immediately. By noon, paperwork that normally took weeks began moving through the system. Meanwhile, across town, Emily sat at the small kitchen table inside her apartment while Lily colored pictures beside the window. The apartment was modest but spotless. Every object seemed carefully maintained because replacing anything would be difficult. A kettle whistled softly from the stove. Emily opened her email while sipping coffee. Most messages were ordinary. Work schedules, class reminders, utility notices. Then one subject line caught her attention. Mercy Children's Hospital Financial Assistance Department. Her heart skipped. She opened the message immediately. As her eyes moved across the screen, confusion replaced anxiety. Then disbelief replaced confusion. She read it again and again. According to the letter, Lily's medication expenses had been approved through a newly expanded pediatric support fund. Nearly every cost she had spent weeks worrying about would now be covered. Emily stared at the screen. Her hands trembled slightly. Mommy, Lily asked. What happened? Emily looked at her daughter. For several seconds, she could not speak. I think her voice cracked. I think something good happened. Lily smiled. See? I told Mr. Hops things were getting better. Emily laughed through sudden tears. Children often accepted miracles far more easily than adults. Across the city, Alexander sat through meetings, signed contracts, and reviewed reports. Outwardly, everything appeared normal. Yet several times throughout the day his mind drifted back to a small diner, a tired mother, and a 6-year-old girl carrying white roses through a hospital hallway. Late that afternoon, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He recognized it immediately. Emily. For a moment, he simply stared at the screen before answering. Hello. Silence lingered briefly on the other end. Then her voice appeared, softer than he remembered. I do not know if this was your doing. Alexander smiled faintly. I am not sure what you mean. Emily laughed quietly. That is a very suspicious answer. He leaned back in his chair. How is Lily? Better. The relief in her voice was unmistakable. Much better. Alexander glanced toward the city below. Traffic moved through the afternoon sunlight. People hurried between buildings. Thousands of stories unfolding at once. Yet somehow this one mattered. I am glad, he said. Another pause followed. Comfortable this time. Then Emily spoke again. You know, yesterday morning I thought everything was falling apart. Alexander listened. And now? She looked across the room where Lily was holding the bouquet of white roses while placing them carefully into a glass jar. Several petals had begun opening fully in the sunlight. Now I think maybe life surprises us when we least expect it. Alexander smiled. I think that happens sometimes. Neither of them realized it yet, but the wrong message that had brought them together was no longer the most important part of the story. The most important part was what happened afterward. The choice to care, the decision to show up, and the quiet reminder that even in a city of millions, one act of kindness could still find exactly the right person. 3 weeks passed. Spring slowly settled over Chicago, replacing cold rain with bright mornings and longer evenings. Life did not suddenly become perfect for Emily Carter. The bills still arrived. Work remained exhausting. Her accounting classes still consumed late nights after Lily had gone to sleep. But something fundamental had changed. For the first time in years, she no longer felt as though she was carrying the entire weight of the world alone. Lily's health improved steadily. The medication was working. Her energy returned little by little. The dark circles beneath Emily's eyes began fading as uninterrupted sleep became possible again. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Emily sat on a park bench while Lily chased pigeons across a grassy field with Mr. Hops tucked beneath one arm. Children's laughter drifted through the air. Nearby, families gathered beneath flowering trees. The simple scene felt almost unreal after the fear and uncertainty of the hospital. Her phone vibrated softly. A message appeared on the screen. Alexander Hayes. She smiled before opening it. Over the past few weeks, they had exchanged occasional texts. Nothing dramatic. Sometimes he asked how Lily was feeling. Sometimes Emily shared a funny story from work. Sometimes they simply talked about ordinary things. Yet somehow those conversations had become part of her day. The message contained only one sentence. Look behind you. Emily frowned and turned around. Across the park, Alexander stood near the walking path holding 2 cups of coffee. Lily spotted him first. Alexander, she shouted before sprinting across the grass. He barely had time to react before she wrapped her arms around him. Emily watched the scene and felt herself smile. Alexander greeted Lily as though she were the most important person in the park. Not because he had to, because he genuinely enjoyed her company. A few minutes later, he joined Emily on the bench and handed her a coffee. You keep appearing unexpectedly, she said. Apparently, that has become a habit. They sat quietly for a moment, watching Lily attempt to teach Mr. Hops how to climb a tree. Finally, Emily looked at him. There is something I have wanted to ask. Alexander already knew the question. The hospital fund? Emily nodded. Was it you? He considered denying it, then decided against it. Partially. Emily shook her head and laughed softly. I knew it. You were not supposed to. You underestimate how suspicious accountants can be. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the pond nearby. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emily said something he did not expect. Thank you. Alexander looked toward the water. You have thanked me enough. Not for the help. She paused. For showing up. He turned toward her. Emily's eyes were steady, honest. Most people would have ignored that message. Alexander thought back to the hospital. Waiting room. The white roses. The frightened mother trying to stay strong for her daughter. Maybe. Emily smiled. But you did not. Across the field, Lily suddenly ran back toward them carrying a dandelion. For you, she announced, handing it to Alexander. He accepted it with complete seriousness. This is impressive. It is lucky, Lily explained. Then I will keep it. Emily laughed. Alexander smiled. And in that moment, everything felt remarkably simple. Not because their lives were free of problems. Not because every question had been answered, but because kindness had created something neither of them expected. Trust, friendship, hope. As the sun began lowering across the city skyline, Emily glanced at the man sitting beside her. The stranger who had answered a message never meant for him. The man who arrived carrying flowers when she needed encouragement more than anything else. The man who reminded her that sometimes help arrives from places we never think to look. Months earlier, she might have called it coincidence. Now she was not so sure. Because some mistakes do not feel like mistakes at all. Sometimes a wrong number reaches exactly the right person. Sometimes a simple act of kindness changes more than a single day. And sometimes the message that transforms your life is the one you never intended to send.